Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming down to a walkthrough with the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office. My name is Sim Gill. I'm the Salt Lake County District Attorney. And today's walkthrough on an officer-involved critical incident and use of force pertains to July 4th of 2024, where a Riverton Police Department officer, K-9 Sergeant E.J. Estrada used lethal force against Ryan Patrick Ludeman. Here are the facts that were developed through our investigation. On July 4th of 2024 at 11:20 p.m., after Riverton City fireworks show was done, a male called 911 and reported a hit and run by a recreational vehicle that hit their vehicle near 1300 West and 128 South in Riverton. The caller further advised that the recreational vehicle was about to turn on 1300 West but was stuck in traffic, that the driver was aware that they had hit them, and you could smell alcohol on his breath, and that he had a photo of the suspect's driver's license. A motor officer, Officer Hyatt, was able to get through the traffic and pull over the vehicle, a white 2016 Arctic Cat Wildcat 1000 side-by-side utility task vehicle. On 1300 West, just south of the intersection, Officer Hyatt made contact with the driver, who was identified as Ryan Patrick Ludeman. At 11:34 p.m., a second officer, Officer Austin, arrived and then made contact with Mr. Ludeman. At 11:40 p.m., Officer Austin asked Mr. Ludeman if he had had anything to drink, which he denied. Officer Austin then asked him to do field sobriety tests, and he refused. At 11:41 p.m., the officers asked Mr. Ludeman to step out of the vehicle and over to the sidewalk. After initially not complying, Mr. Ludeman got out, walked over the sidewalk, and sat down on the curb south of the Wildcat, facing east with his head down in his phone. One of the things that we learned was that Officer Austin was suffering from allergies, and although there were reports of the smell of alcohol, he said that I couldn't smell anything at that time. After speaking with Mr. Ludeman further, Officer Austin requested that Sergeant Estrada, who had said that he'd do the investigation if the driver was intoxicated, to come. At about 11:50, Sergeant Estrada arrived. After speaking with Officer Hyatt, Sergeant Estrada made contact with the Wildcat's front passenger and took down her information. And Officer Hyatt left to go check on the damage. Sergeant Estrada then walked over to Officer Austin, who handed him Mr. Ludeman's driver's license. At 11:53 and 12 seconds, Sergeant Estrada made contact with Mr. Ludeman, asking, "What's up, Ryan?" As he wrote down his information. Mr. Ludeman did not respond, and Sergeant Estrada asked, "You there, Ryan?" Sergeant Estrada then crouched down and asked Mr. Ludeman questions, which he answered. At 11:53:49 p.m., Sergeant Estrada asked Mr. Ludeman if he was comfortable doing some field sobriety tests so he could make sure that he was good to drive. Mr. Ludeman responded, "Nope." Sergeant Estrada then told Mr. Ludeman that he smells like alcohol. Mr. Ludeman responded, "Sure." And Sergeant Estrada stood up and told him to go ahead and stand up. Mr. Ludeman, and he had said to him, hey, I smell alcohol on you. I want to make sure you're safe to drive, etc. Mr. Ludeman did not comply and remained seated on the curb. At 11:54:07, Sergeant Estrada told Mr. Ludeman to put his hands behind his back as he and Officer Austin went to take him into custody, with Sergeant Estrada first grabbing hold of his left wrist and his left hand. Mr. Ludeman immediately produced a knife in his right hand and ejected its blade as he immediately tensed up and began resisting. Meanwhile, Sergeant Estrada grabbed Mr. Ludeman's right arm with his right hand, and Officer Austin grabbed his upper right arm with both hands. At 11:54:09 p.m., Sergeant Estrada called out, "He's got a knife, he's got a knife, he's got a knife." A brief and very dynamic struggle ensued, during which Mr. Ludeman dropped the knife, continued to resist and pull away, and was at his feet in the roadway, was on his feet in the roadway facing south before going down to the sidewalk. At 11:54:12 p.m., Sergeant Estrada drew his handgun and fired at Mr. Ludeman 3 times. Sergeant Estrada then advised over the radio of shots fired. In a subsequent interview with Officer Austin, who later explained that Sergeant Estrada was on his left, I was in front of him, just to the right, so I knew we were going 82, which means that they were going to take him into custody. So I moved in and I went to grab him, his right arm, and he immediately tensed up, and I went to grab his wrist, and I just heard Sergeant Estrada say, "He's got a knife, he's got a knife." I couldn't see where the knife was. I couldn't see his hands or anything, so I pushed off and backed off, and I was going to gun, and I saw Sergeant Estrada spinning him around, and I saw Sergeant Estrada draw out, and they were up on the sidewalk, and he fired, I believe, 3 shots, kind of on a downward angle like this, as you showed, trying to get away from the guy. The guy immediately dropped. Officer Austin further explained, it happened really fast. So like I remember Sergeant Estrada step in, I stepped in, I was hands-on, and he tensed up and pulled away from me like this, from where I remember he kind of twisted away from me, and that's when Sergeant Estrada said he has a knife. I couldn't see either of his hands. I don't know if he went into a pocket or behind him or what, but he tensed up, and I went down and pulled away, and then kind of spun off Sergeant Estrada as I was backing off. And then by the time I could get my bearings of what was going on, Sergeant Estrada had drawn his gun out and fired a couple of shots. Officer Austin further described, when I pulled back, I don't know if he was grabbing Sergeant Estrada, but Sergeant Estrada was standing. He was kind of on his knees from what I remember, almost like if you were wrestling or you're going to take out somebody's knees. And so I'm trying to think of how to explain it. Just trying to put together, because I pulled off, I didn't see exactly what happened, but from how they positioned, my best guess is that he spun away from me and was going for Sergeant Estrada. I'm not sure what hand the knife was in or anything like that. It seemed like the Sergeant Estrada was trying to back off and went to gun and fired at him, and then he just dropped right there. After firing his weapon, Sergeant Estrada remained with Mr. Ludeman as Officer Austin went to the Wildcat passengers. As additional officers arrived, Sergeant Estrada explained, this was a statement, just a spontaneous statement that Sergeant Estrada explained. He pulled his obvious echo, meaning deceased, gunshot wound to the head. He pulled the knife on me when I went to go 82, that is to take him into custody, end quote. Medical responders quickly arrived, assessed Mr. Ludeman, and determined that he was deceased. Additionally, shortly after shooting, Sergeant Estrada told officers he tried to stab Officer Austin, and then explained he had an auto ejector knife when I went to go 82 with him, and he then made a motion with his right hand indicating ejection of the knife. Protocol investigators at the scene recovered a gray-handled auto assist OTF out the front non-folding knife with an approximately 3-inch blade from the sidewalk. Additionally, Mr. Ludeman was wearing a leather holster on his right back waistband. The autopsy found 3 gunshot wounds, as well as blood alcohol level of 0.143 with Mr. Ludeman, and the presence of amphetamines. Now what I'm going to do, so that sets the stage for it. We were able to look at a series of body-worn cameras, so I'm going to share those with you as the team and the investigators, we went through it. The first video that I'm going to show you is Officer Austin. So again, the setup is it's a lot of traffic. Fireworks have gotten over. Mr. Ludeman has already effectuated the right-hand turn from the incident where the accident occurred. And what that happened is that traffic was stopped. He ostensibly went onto the dirt part of between the traffic and where the cars were parked. And as he was going through, apparently there was a accident that happened. And then he had gone and made a right-hand turn and was stopped there. So here is Officer Austin's body cam, who was the supporting officer when this incident happened. Keith, go ahead and play that.
What was that?
This is Sergeant Estrada.
Stop, Ryan. You there, Ryan? You still living in Candy View Drive on Pleasant Grove? Let's get phone for you.
Officer Estrada can smell now the alcohol.
Driving side by side? Sure, yeah. Comfortable doing some good sobriety tests for me so I can make sure you can drive?
So you ask him if you would do some feel sobriety.
Alcohol.
Smell the alcohol. They says no.
Go and stand up. No. Put your hands behind your back. You got a knife, you got a knife, you got a knife. Riverton 60, shots fired, give me the air. Back up, get them contained.
So that gave us the perspective from Officer Austin, who was there as assisting with him. What was important about that, again, that corroborated what Officer Austin had told us, that the Sergeant Estrada had been called to help with a possible intoxication review. Officer Estrada goes down. He can now engage with Mr. Ryan there, Ludeman, and then he smells the alcohol. In that exchange, he asks him, it tells him, I'd like to see, if you can capable of driving, and will you do some field sobriety tests? He says no, and at that point, when he gets up, he has already made the decision, as Officer Austin says, to go 82, which is to effectuate the arrest, and that's what happens over there. The next video is from Sergeant Estrada's body cam. And so you saw Officer Austin's perspective. This is now from Sergeant Estrada's body cam, and he is the shooting officer. Go ahead, please play that. Gets the information. Austin.
What's up, Ryan? You there, Ryan? You still living in Canyon View Drive in Pleasant Grove? What's a good phone number for you? Are you the one driving this side by side? Sure or yes? Alright. Are you comfortable doing some field sobriety tests for me so I can make sure you get to drive? Okay. You smell like alcohol. Go and stand up. Or no? Put your hands behind your back. You got a knife, you got a knife. Riverton 60, shots fired, give me the air.
So that gave us the perspective and how that dynamic situation went between the two officers. This was important as we reviewed all the evidence. When Mr. Ludeman was asked to exit out of there, now it's important, you've heard me say this before, the camera sees sometimes not always capture something maybe the officer does not. This was, I believe, Officer Austin body-worn camera. When he's asked to go out, this was important for us because here is the sheath where the knife is in. It was in there in the back area of him as Mr. Ludeman was asked to exit out. Mr. Ludeman was going to go and sit at this point. Now, the reason this becomes relevant for us analytically is because there is the sheath, the knife is there. And as I will explain, that there had to be a conscious, deliberate decision to make to pull the knife out, and analytically that becomes very important. So this was a very important clue for us as we went through this analysis. The next thing that I want to show you is, again, so we have to capture, it's a dynamic situation. There are two officers who were involved with a civilian, and so what we did is we took the body-worn camera of Officer Austin and Sergeant Estrada, synced them together so we could see this event unfold simultaneously. So go ahead and play that. And again, that was the best way we could start to capture and appreciate how dynamic and how quickly this happened. So now, once we had this piece of information here and with the side-by-side comparison, what we did is that we took these two and then we slowed them down on a side-by-side. And now it's important that you will actually hear an audible click, what happens when this ejector knife. So what I'm explaining is a housing which is about this big, and you have to push a button for the knife blade to actually be ejected out. It's not a folding knife, it's an ejection that happens over there. So go ahead and play this, please. Click, right there. So this was important to us for several reasons. One, we slow down the dynamic nature of it. Two, you can actually hear the audible click of the knife as the ejector is initiated in that process. And again, the response that you're hearing within the interaction that's occurring. So then we were able to even take this and slow it down further, because now we know what we're looking for in the context of the situation. And this, we took it from the last bit and we actually slowed it down further, played this down, and we're gonna pause now, focusing on what we identified where the knife was. Go ahead, play that. Keep an eye here. Click, right there. And that was the gesture right there. The hand is coming up, and you see the engagement of the ejector on the knife that happened. So and now that was, then I wanted to show you one more, which is from the other angle. As well. So this was captured on both body-worn cameras from different angles, and this clearly shows that the blade has been engaged and it has already come out. The next thing was that, as I said, Sergeant Estrada has a constitutional right not to give us a statement. He chose not to. We were able to gather the information. But this happened really immediately right after. There was a spontaneous utterance that was made by the officer, and it was important for us to, in light of separate and independent from this, we had it, but this also was important. Please go ahead and play this.
Trust that, Chris. Huh? Trust that, Chris.
Strike to stat, Chris.
You trust that, Chris? Smart, dude. He had an auto-ejector knife on 282 when you're fucking. Where's Chris?
And again, that allowed us to, again, see what his perception of that was. And so now, when we gathered all this information together, here was one of the conclusions and findings from us when we sat and went through this analytically. What was important for us was that, as we showed, that when the driver was asked, Mr. Ludeman was asked to get out, the knife is visible. When Ryan gets out, the knife is in its case. Ryan goes down and sits down, and Ryan had to make a conscious and deliberate decision to pull the knife out of his sheath, and he then didn't say, I have a knife. He didn't say, I'm pulling a knife. He pulls that knife while that period of waiting is. It is now in his right hand. And he continues to actually sit there while the officers are interacting, including Officer Estrada when he goes down, and he keeps his head down, and he has it. He does not tell anyone that he has the knife, and then he makes the conscious choice to open the knife, and he opens the knife, and at that moment, when he's been told that he's going to be arrested for DUI, he knows that he's going to go into custody, and it is not unreasonable when the totality of that to infer that at that point, from my perspective, that he's flipped that knife open and he's done it with one purpose and one purpose only, because he plans on using it on the officers. And that people can disagree with that, but in the totality of all these sort of sequences that we have, that is the conclusion that we're left with. Simultaneously within that, there's an audible sound. Simultaneously with that is a perception by Sergeant Estrada that he has a knife. He verbalizes it by yelling that. Austin tells us, honestly, that he does not see the knife. He doesn't know where his hands are, but he hears Estrada say that. And at that point, that dynamic is less than 5 seconds of that struggle that occurs. And what we noticed as we played that, and it's important, the knife actually drops to the ground. But Estrada does not know that. It happens so quickly. When we went through it, as that struggle is happening, we can actually see the knife drop and it goes down. And Estrada, who has perceived the threat and has it, and is trying to, what I can gather and what we can gather, to both keep his distance from him, but also to take custody of Mr. Ryan Ludeman. He has already made the decision that he's in a zone of danger and fires the 3 shots. Now, I'm not going to be in Mr. Sergeant Estrada's head, but it is a reasonable inference from all of the totality of what we have. And then based on that, our charge was to see if any criminal charges are viable. We declined to file any criminal charges. At this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Right, so you think he had the knife when he was walking to the curb?
Yes.
Then held it? And
Yeah.
Once they tried to get him up, he clicks.
That's right. So, yeah, absolutely. That's why when we went through it, we can see. Now, Austin didn't see it, or other people, and I've always said, the camera lets me have a perspective, but sometimes, as I've said before, my head is on the camera's looking at you like this, Pat, but my head is on a swivel here, and I can be looking at this and not see that. But it was important for us because we saw it. We saw the sheath, we saw the knife that's there in it. And at that point, he goes and sits down. There is interaction that's occurring. Estrada is being summoned because there's a concern that he may be intoxicated. And he's sitting there. So from the moment that he sits down to the point where the decision is made to arrest, he had to manually unsheath and pull the knife out, and he had it. Because at that time, his hands are, when Estrada goes down, you see that his hands are up there, and if the knife is already there, and then he has to then make the second conscious decision. The first one's to pull the knife out and keep it secreted in his hand. The second was the decision to push the ejector button, so the blade came out. And he makes the blade come out as they're reaching down to effectuate the arrest.
And you kind of addressed this, but looking at that video, you have to use a reasonable inference.
Yeah.
I mean, he was armed, and by letter of the law, I mean, he was justified in shooting him, but you've got a guy who's extremely intoxicated who probably couldn't stand up straight anyway, and just, he drops the knife. I mean, do you like, I mean,
So this is so here's the thing, right? His BAC level is 0.143. And in the video we saw, he does get up, he walks, he's not stumbling and falling down when he moves from the vehicle and goes and sits down. And they're still trying to figure out whether he's intoxicated to that level. Now, what he's done, what we see, is that the initial contact, he's got his head down. He's not turning his head and speaking to the officers. The officers are asking questions, and he's scrolling on his phone, looking for, I think, his license and sort information. He goes and sits down, okay? And at that point, he could have, so there's a whole host of permutations. I just want you to know that I have a knife, okay? Or I'm armed or whatever. But he is making the decision to pull that knife out. He's secreting it, and he's making a conscious decision to open the blade. At that moment, keep in mind, that's why we synced them and we showed them. Estrada is going down to get him to stand up. Austin is reaching also from the other side to get him to do that. And as they go down, that's when he both hears the click. We hear the click, and we also see the blade come out. At that moment, the perception of Estrada is he's got a knife, and he yells it. But he is right on top of him at that point. And he doesn't know. And the way that body moves, there's nothing that tells me that Estrada saw the knife drop. We see it as we go through it. But we see it because we're looking for it, but it happens in such less than 5 seconds. And it is not unreasonable. And remember, before Estrada makes the decision to pull the trigger, he has to make that decision and react on it. So within that 5 seconds is that compression. He's already made the decision to fire as he pulls that weapon out because he's reacting immediately to that perception of the knife in his hand. And simultaneously, his other spontaneous utterances, his perception is that he's going to stab Chris, and certainly somebody else and himself. So he's going to stop that threat at that moment. And as you and I talk about it, there's an elongated period within that. Try to compress that in less than 5 seconds. And that is what is here. As soon as he says knife, and he is sitting right next to him, it is not unreasonable that he was capable of getting stabbed himself or Officer Austin. And he, at that point, I think under Utah law, would be justified in the use of force. And he is reacting to that. There is nothing that I have an objective level that says that he knew that the knife was on the ground. Austin tells us he doesn't know where the knife is. He never sees the knife. He doesn't know which hand it is. But he does react to Estrada's perception and utterance that there's a knife. Okay? And so at that moment and that proximity, I would have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, one, it was unreasonable for Sergeant Estrada to be in fear of his life or Officer Austin's life, given that proximity and his perception. And it would be unreasonable for him to use that force, and it would be unreasonable beyond a reasonable doubt within that perception. And I think that given what we know and how we went through it, we reached the conclusion that the officer use the force consistent with the statute that the legislature has created, and you would not be able to meet your burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt that it was an unreasonable use of force.
So what would you say to people who see the video and say, well, the guy was on the ground, the officer quickly stood up, he had time to back off and grab a taser?
Well, remember, the officer is in the process of lifting him up. The two officers, they've got their hands on him. When that right hand comes up and the blade clicks open. At that moment, if you and I are bent over like this and he could have stabbed Estrada right there, and his perception, because he saw it, because he's like less than a foot and a half, 2 feet from the blade right there. He's right on top of him. We have the luxury of slowing this down. We have the luxury of me slowing it down because I can see the knife being dropped. But when I play that in real time, side by side, and that's why it was important for us to get a sense of how quickly this happened. That the moment he perceives it, that danger is immediate, and I don't think it's unreasonable for him to fear for his own life or the life for somebody else. Now, it would be another thing if he lost control of him and the knife goes up and the guy gets up and he shoots him and there's that perception. That knife is dropped in that melee that's occurring. It just happens so spontaneously. It's just that when I slow it down, I can see it. I can see it being dropped. If I'm struggling with a person, if you're struggling to control me, you don't know when that's going to happen. That's the challenge. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes.
Is there anything in the law that that requires somebody who's being subdued with the force to be facing an officer? In the video, he has his back towards the officers, and then they subdue him.
Well, they are actually trying to, he's facing the street. They've asked him to stand up. He has not stood up. So now they're going to take him into custody. So both are going hands-on to get him to stand up because they're going to handcuff him. He's going into custody. So at that point, they're on the sides from there. The officer has made the request. He says, stand up. He's not standing up. He's made the decision he's going to be arrested because he can smell the alcohol. He's given an opportunity to do field sobriety tests, and he's refused to do that. And Officer Austin tells us that he was, knowing as Sergeant Estrada, that they were going to go 82. They were going to take him into custody. So they're going to get him to stand up, and as they're trying to take him into custody, that's when he's flipping that knife open while he's on the ground as they grab him. Okay? Any other questions? Thank you.